Donald Trump just suffered another embarrassing resignation from someone he personally appointed, and his unhinged response on social media might reveal how badly his entire administration is collapsing under the weight of its own unpopularity. We're not talking about some low-level staffer quietly leaving. We're talking about reports that Kevin Couch, the newly appointed senior vice president of artistic programming at what Trump renamed the Kennedy Center, resigned less than 2 weeks after being hired. That Trump then spiraled on Truth Social, trying to blame deficits on everyone except himself. And sources suggest what might make this resignation so significant is the context in which it occurred. While Trump's ICE operations in Minneapolis generate nationwide revulsion, while his Epstein file cover-up continues, while his approval ratings crater particularly among the Latino voters he needs, even the people he appoints to run cultural institutions are reportedly deciding they can't associate with his brand.
It is an authoritarian state with secret police who use force and intimidation and sometimes violence to cut immigrants out from the national fabric. And then the ideological project of suppressing dissent and smearing anyone who resists as domestic terrorists and as assassins.
When someone accepts prestigious position at Kennedy Center and quits within days, that's not typical job dissatisfaction. That might be recognition that working for Trump has become so toxic that no amount of prestige or salary makes the association worth the damage to reputation and conscience. But before we break down everything, please subscribe to our channel, John Brown Show. Your subscription actually matters here. All right, let's get into what this Kennedy Center resignation reveals about Trump's current position and why sources suggest it's part of pattern where Republicans are fleeing his administration in real time. Because Kevin Couch reportedly lasted less than 2 weeks in position that should have been career highlight. The Kennedy Center announced his hiring on January 16th with statement from Rick Grinnell praising his clear-eyed approach. By January 29th, Couch had resigned. That's extraordinary timeline for someone who presumably wanted the job when he accepted it. And when you look at what happened during those 2 weeks, the reason for resignation might become clear. Trump's Minneapolis operations generated images of terrorized immigrant communities that Americans found repulsive. Coverage of ICE tactics, including killings of Alex Prey and others, dominated news cycles. Protests outside detention facilities showed community resistance. And Trump's response was doubling down on most unpopular policies while attacking anyone who criticized them. Sources suggest if you're trying to program cultural institution that depends on artists wanting to perform there, watching your boss implement policies that artists universally condemn creates impossible situation.
What we've seen here is that the people in Minneapolis are more resolved than ever to protect each other, their neighbors, the word they use over and over and over in every conversation, to protect their neighbors, wherever that neighbor might be from, whatever that neighbor's status might be, from this government.
When Trump has made himself so toxic that even Republican appointees to cultural positions can't sustain association with him, that indicates political collapse beyond what polling alone captures. Let's start by establishing what happened during those 2 weeks that Kevin Couch was nominally Kennedy Center's programming head. Because sources suggest understanding the context of his resignation requires grasping how horrifying Trump's Minneapolis operations have become to average Americans. Reports indicate ICE's Operation Metro Surge has created atmosphere of terror in immigrant communities. People afraid to leave their homes, families live streaming their commutes to work, so children know parents arrived safely, community members organizing carpools because neighbors are too frightened to drive themselves. Think about what that means. This isn't just aggressive law enforcement. Sources suggest this is systematic intimidation designed to make entire communities feel hunted. When someone has to live stream their drive to work so family knows they weren't grabbed by federal agents, that's not public safety. That might be state terror. And Americans watching this unfold on television and social media are reportedly reacting with revulsion rather than support for Trump's tactics. And there's the specific horror of what happened to Alex Prey. Reports indicate he was ICU nurse who saw federal agents pushing down a woman at protest. He intervened to protect her. And 6 federal agents allegedly shot him multiple times, continuing to fire into his body after he was already dead on the ground. Video evidence contradicts official narratives about threat he posed. Yet Trump administration continues characterizing him as domestic terrorist who deserved to die. When you combine those images with reports of people being grabbed off streets, detained without proper hearings, flown to Texas and dumped without money or phones, separated from families for paperwork violations decades old, the cumulative picture allegedly is one of cruelty without purpose, not targeting dangerous criminals, not making communities safer, just inflicting maximum pain on vulnerable people to send message that nobody is safe from Trump's enforcement apparatus. Make sure you're subscribed to John Brown Show because sources suggest Americans are responding to this not with approval, but with mobilization against it. Protests outside federal detention facilities continuing despite cold weather, retired physicians organizing rides for terrified neighbors, community members keeping watch to document abuses. That grassroots resistance indicates Trump has crossed line where his tactics unite opposition rather than intimidating it into silence. And for someone like Kevin Couch trying to program Kennedy Center, watching this unfold might have created moral crisis about whether he could continue working for administration responsible. But let's talk about what programming Kennedy Center under Trump administration actually means and why sources suggest it might be literally impossible job. Because Kennedy Center depends on artists wanting to perform there. Musicians, dancers, theater companies, comedians, and the artistic community has been nearly unanimous in its rejection of Trump, particularly after his ICE operations and Epstein cover-up. Reports indicate major performers have refused to appear at venues associated with Trump. Artists who would normally consider Kennedy Center prestigious booking are declining because they don't want association with administration. Think about what that means for programming director. Your job is attracting compelling shows that audiences want to see, but the artists who create those shows don't want to perform under Trump's name. The Kennedy Center brand that once meant cultural prestige now allegedly carries Trump's toxicity. Every booking conversation becomes negotiation about whether performer can stomach the association. And when answer is consistently no, your job becomes impossible to perform successfully. And sources suggest there's also audience dimension. People who attend Kennedy Center performances tend to be educated, culturally engaged, living in Washington, D.C. area. Those demographics skew heavily against Trump. Reports indicate his approval in D.C. is catastrophically low. When your potential audience despises the person whose name is on the building, when they view attending performances there as implicitly supporting administration they oppose, ticket sales suffer. Programming doesn't matter if nobody comes to shows. But there's reportedly another element. Trump renamed it Trump Kennedy Center and installed Rick Grenell as president specifically to politicize institution that was supposed to be above partisan politics. That transformation allegedly alienates both artists and audiences who valued Kennedy Center as cultural space rather than political platform. When institution becomes extension of Trump's brand rather than independent cultural entity, it loses the prestige that made it attractive in first place. And sources suggest Trump's own behavior makes things worse. His social media posts attacking critics, his defense of ICE killings, his cover-up of Epstein files. Every controversy he generates creates another reason for artists to stay away and audiences to boycott. Programming director trying to book shows while boss is generating daily outrages is like trying to fill swimming pool while someone else is draining it. The effort is futile because underlying problem keeps getting worse. Share this video with everyone you know because when Kevin Couch accepted position, he might not have fully grasped these dynamics. Perhaps he thought he could separate programming from politics, or believed Trump's controversies wouldn't affect his ability to book shows. But reports suggest reality of situation became clear quickly. Within 2 weeks, he recognized the job was impossible or the association too damaging to sustain. That rapid realization and immediate resignation indicates how toxic Trump's brand has become even to Republicans willing to work for him. But what might reveal Trump's desperation, more than the resignation itself, is his response to it on Truth Social. Because sources suggest, rather than acknowledging problems or trying to address them, Trump went into defensive spiral that blamed everyone except himself. Reports indicate he posted that Kennedy Center had suffered massive deficits for years before he came in to save it, that he's making it far better than ever before, that anyone criticizing him is ignoring his heroic rescue of failing institution. Think about what that response reveals. Kevin Couch's resignation within 2 weeks of hiring isn't mentioned. The exodus of performers refusing to appear there isn't addressed. The fundamental problem that Trump's association makes Kennedy Center toxic to both artists and audiences gets completely ignored. Instead, sources suggest Trump pivots to financial deficits as if money is the issue rather than reputation and association. When you can't defend substance of what you're doing, you change subject to metrics that sound impressive, and the claim about massive deficits for years might itself be misleading according to sources. Reports indicate Kennedy Center, like many cultural institutions, requires subsidies because tickets don't cover operating costs. That's normal for arts organizations. But Trump allegedly treats this as evidence of mismanagement rather than reality of how cultural institutions function. His rescue might just be renaming the building and installing loyalist as president while underlying financial model remains unchanged, except now fewer people want to attend or perform. But there's reportedly deeper issue with Trump's response. He can't acknowledge that his toxicity is problem, can't admit that putting his name on institution decreases rather than increases its value, can't recognize that his policies are so unpopular that association with him has become professional liability even for Republicans. Sources suggest that inability to process negative feedback, that insistence that everything he touches becomes better, despite evidence to contrary, might indicate cognitive disconnect from reality that affects his decision-making. And when Trump writes, "If possible, make it far better than ever before," that "if possible" qualifier might reveal uncertainty he's trying to hide. Sources indicate he recognizes Kennedy Center situation isn't working, but can't admit it's because of him. So he hedges with language suggesting success is conditional rather than guaranteed. That's not confident leadership. That might be recognition that project is failing disguised as triumphant announcement. Trump makes something worse by associating it with himself. People flee the resulting toxicity. His response is attacking critics and claiming he's actually made everything better. That cycle repeats across every institution he touches. Kennedy Center is just latest example of pattern where Trump's insistence that he improves things can't overcome reality that his involvement destroys them. But Kevin Couch's resignation isn't an isolated incident. Sources suggest it's part of accelerating pattern where Republicans are leaving Trump administration or declining to join it because association has become too damaging. Reports indicate Border Patrol Chief Greg Bovino was forced out after his Minneapolis operations generated too much controversy. DHS Secretary Christine Noem was allegedly sidelined. Lindsay Halligan resigned from DOJ in disgrace. Multiple officials are facing contempt proceedings from federal judges, and now Kennedy Center programming director quits within 2 weeks. Think about what that pattern reveals. These aren't Democrats sabotaging Trump from within. These are allegedly Republicans he appointed who decided they can't sustain the association. When your own party members keep fleeing, that indicates problem isn't partisan opposition, but rather fundamental dysfunction making work environment untenable or association professionally suicidal. Sources suggest the resignations are accelerating as Trump's approval craters and his policies generate increasing backlash. And there's reportedly recruiting problem emerging. When positions open up through resignations or firings, Trump struggles to find qualified Republicans willing to take them, because potential appointees see what happened to their predecessors. They watch officials get scapegoated when policies fail. They recognize that serving Trump means defending indefensible tactics and potentially facing legal accountability. That makes recruitment difficult when you need competent people rather than just loyalists willing to say yes to anything. But sources suggest there's also exodus of career staff beyond just political appointees. Reports indicate over 6,000 people have left Justice Department through resignations and firings. Civil rights divisions gutted, corruption units decimated. That institutional knowledge and capacity takes decades to rebuild. Even if Trump administration reversed course tomorrow, the damage to government's ability to function might persist for years because people who knew how to do jobs are gone. And when you combine political appointee resignations with career staff departures, you allegedly get government that can't execute even policies that might be theoretically legal, because nobody knows how things work. Institutional memory is destroyed. Experienced professionals are replaced with inexperienced loyalists. That dysfunction creates additional crises that generate more resignations and self-reinforcing cycle of collapse. Now, Trump's response to this exodus is making it worse rather than better. Instead of moderating tactics to stem the bleeding, he doubles down. Instead of trying to retain talent, he attacks people who leave. That guarantees more departures because anyone considering staying sees that loyalty isn't rewarded and disagreement isn't tolerated. The only option becomes getting out before you're either scapegoated for failures or implicated in abuses. But underlying all these resignations is fundamental reality that sources suggest Trump can't escape. He's deeply unpopular in ways that are getting worse rather than better. And that unpopularity makes association with him toxic professionally and politically. Reports indicate his approval ratings have cratered. His deportation program polls underwater by 35 points among Latino voters who were supposedly part of his coalition. Even Fox News polls show majorities think ICE operations have gone too far. That's political disaster. Think about what happens when president becomes this unpopular this quickly. People who work for him get tainted by association. When they eventually leave administration and try returning to normal careers, the Trump years become liability on resume rather than credential. Sources suggest that's why smart Republicans are calculating whether staying is worth potential permanent damage to reputations, and increasing numbers are deciding it's not, leading to exodus of anyone who has other options. And there's specific toxicity around Trump's current policies. The Minneapolis operations generating images Americans find horrifying. The Epstein file cover-up where 99% of documents remain sealed. The attacks on press freedom where DOJ tried prosecuting journalist Don Lemon. Each of these creates moral question for people working in administration. Sources indicate at some point you have to ask whether paycheck is worth complicity in actions you know are wrong. And for people with functioning consciences, answer increasingly is no. But reports suggest there's also political calculation. If Trump's approval continues cratering, if Republicans lose badly in midterms, as polling suggests they might, association with this administration becomes professional death sentence. Anyone hoping for future in Republican politics might calculate that distancing themselves now preserves options later, that they're better off resigning and claiming they left because they disagreed than staying and being forever linked to administration's failures. And sources indicate there's international dimension. America's reputation is being destroyed by Trump's tactics. When foreigners see ICE operations, when they watch President cover up Epstein files, when they observe assaults on press freedom, they view America as authoritarian state rather than democracy. That damages everyone associated with government, including career diplomats and military officers who depend on international credibility. Some might be leaving because they can't represent country they no longer recognize. There's reportedly also simple human factor. Working for Trump means defending the indefensible daily, doing jobs that hurt vulnerable people, watching him attack anyone who shows human decency. Sources suggest that psychological toll of constant moral compromise wears people down. Eventually, even those willing to serve Republican administration decide Trump's specific version of it requires more ethical compromise than they can sustain. So what does this accelerating resignation pattern mean for Trump administration's ability to function and for midterm elections? Because sources suggest when government loses institutional knowledge faster than it can be replaced, when qualified people refuse to join, when even loyalists keep leaving, you get administration that's effectively collapsing from within, regardless of what policies it tries implementing. Reports indicate basic functions aren't happening because nobody competent remains to do them. Coordination with courts breaks down, legal processes get ignored, Even simple administrative tasks fail because experienced staff are gone. And that dysfunction creates more political problems. When ICE operations violate court orders because administration can't manage compliance, judges hold officials in contempt. When Kennedy Center can't book performers because programming director quits, audiences notice decline. When every agency has similar stories of chaos and failure, cumulative picture allegedly is one of government that's broken. And voters tend to punish broken government in midterm elections. But sources suggest there's specific problem for House Republicans facing re-election. They have to defend Trump's record while he keeps generating new controversies that make defense impossible. How do you campaign on immigration enforcement when images from Minneapolis show ICE killing nurses? How do you defend Epstein cover-up when voters want transparency? How do you overcome Latino approval cratering 35 points? Reports indicate Republicans in competitive districts are realizing Trump is anchor dragging them down. Think about what happens if Democrats campaign effectively on Trump's failures and Republican complicity. They can point to resignations as evidence even Trump's own appointees recognize the administration is disaster. Can highlight polling showing majorities oppose his tactics. Can document court rulings finding violations and abuses. Can show video of communities terrorized by ICE. That cumulative case allegedly becomes overwhelming in ways that override typical midterm dynamics, and there's reportedly question of whether Trump moderates or doubles down. Normal political calculation would be recognizing unpopularity and adjusting course. But sources suggest Trump's psychology doesn't allow that. He interprets any retreat as weakness, views moderation as betrayal. That means he's likely to escalate failing tactics rather than changing them, which creates more resignations, more unpopularity, more political damage in self-reinforcing cycle. But if Democrats do take House as polling suggests is possible, sources indicate the investigations and accountability will be immediate. Subpoenas for everyone who participated in Minneapolis operations. Hearings about Epstein cover-up. Impeachment proceedings against Trump and potentially his cabinet members. All the abuses that have been documented will become subjects of congressional investigation with witnesses compelled to testify under oath. That's nightmare scenario Trump is allegedly desperate to avoid. There's also simple reality that Trump has made everything worse. That's not partisan claim. That's observation sources suggest Americans of all political persuasions recognize. Life is worse than a year ago for most people. Culture is degraded, communities are terrorized, press freedom is under attack, international reputation is destroyed, and Trump's response to all of it is claiming he's made everything better. That disconnect between his claims and people's lived experience might be what ultimately destroys him politically. But beyond political calculations and polling numbers, sources suggest there's fundamental moral question about whether anyone should be willing to work for or associate with Trump administration at this point. Because what's happening in Minneapolis and elsewhere isn't just bad policy that reasonable people can disagree about. Reports indicate these are human rights abuses, terrorizing communities, killing people without justification, covering up evidence of powerful people's crimes, prosecuting journalists for reporting facts. When administration crosses those lines, association with it becomes moral failing rather than just professional decision. Think about how history will judge people who enabled this. They won't get to claim they were just following orders or didn't know what was happening. Video evidence exists documenting the abuses. Court rulings have found violations. Public opposition has been clear. Sources suggest anyone still serving in this administration is making conscious choice to be complicit in actions they know are wrong, and that complicity will follow them for rest of their lives. And there's specific question about Republicans who considered themselves principled conservatives. How do they reconcile supporting administration that defies courts, attacks press, covers up crimes, terrorizes communities? Sources indicate the answer for many is they can't reconcile it. That's why resignations keep happening. People reach point where cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable, and they have to either leave or admit they never had principles they claimed. But reports suggest there's also question for Americans more broadly, whether we're willing to hold accountable not just Trump but everyone who enabled him. Sources indicate that means not just voting Democrats in midterms. It means sustained pressure on anyone associated with these abuses, making it clear their actions will follow them, that there's no moving on or letting bygones be bygones, that participation in administration that terrorized communities and covered up crimes should be disqualifying for future positions of trust. And there's historical parallel sources suggest we should learn from. After Reconstruction, America allowed Confederate sympathizers back into power without real accountability. That failure allegedly led to Jim Crow and century of oppression. The lesson might be that without genuine accountability and permanent consequences for participating in oppression, the cycle repeats. That means, this time, we can't be generous to people who participated in Trump's abuses. We have to make their participation disqualifying professionally and politically. Now, multiple sources also suggest there's also question of what replacing Trump with more normal Republican would accomplish. If underlying Republican Party remains willing to embrace authoritarian tactics and abuse vulnerable people, changing president doesn't fix problem. That might require rebuilding entire coalition around different values, around people who sat out elections because they thought politics was broken, around inspiring candidates with moral clarity rather than moderate position papers designed to win over Republicans who enjoy cruelty. So here's what Kevin Couch's resignation from Kennedy Center reveals about Trump administration's current state. Someone appointed to prestigious cultural position quit within 2 weeks because association with Trump had become untenable. That resignation came amid backdrop of Minneapolis horror generating national revulsion. Trump's unhinged social media response blamed deficits and claimed he was saving institution even as programming director fled. And this is part of accelerating pattern where Republicans keep leaving administration because toxicity has become professionally and morally unsustainable. The underlying reality is that Trump is deeply unpopular in ways that are getting worse. His deportation program polls catastrophically among groups he needs. His Epstein cover-up outrages Americans across political spectrum. His attacks on press freedom unite opposition. When majority of Americans think you've gone too far, when images from Minneapolis show communities terrorized, when your own appointees keep quitting, that's not temporary political difficulty. That's collapse. For Republicans facing midterms, association with Trump might be death sentence. They have to defend record that majorities oppose while he generates new controversies daily. They can't distance themselves without alienating his base, but staying close means going down with his sinking approval. That's impossible position that sources suggest could produce Democratic wave if opposition mobilizes effectively around clear moral message about accountability. The moral question transcends politics, whether anyone should be willing to work for administration that terrorizes communities and covers up crimes, whether there should be permanent consequences for participating in these abuses, whether we learn lessons from history about importance of accountability rather than reconciliation without justice. The answers to those questions determine whether Kevin Couch's resignation becomes footnote or symbol of moment when enough people said they can't be complicit anymore. What happens next depends on whether Americans recognize the stakes and act accordingly, whether resignations accelerate until administration can't function, whether voters deliver decisive rejection in midterms, whether consequences follow for everyone who enabled abuses, whether we build politics around inspiring people who sat out rather than appeasing those who enjoyed cruelty. The trajectory Trump is on leads to collapse. Question is how much damage he does before getting there. Stay tuned.